Good morning, folks. This is Anne-Marie. This is the extended SPY report for Thursday, July the 18th. I'd like to remind you that you can see me this evening on webinar from 7 to 8 with Metastock, and we'll be talking about actually the SMI. So, that being said, let's hop right into it, take a look at things, see what we've got going on, see the very tight range, and today we are still within that range. Though we did gap a little below it, we're still stepping up into that space. What's the trade? Well, looks to me like, and let's go down to 15-minute candlestick for just a few moments, very quickly. 168.27. Yes, above 168.27, or at the bounce off of, where should this support action be? 168.02. Kind of tight, but we can see that, right? So 168.02, that's going to be the long action event off the bounce there, or the breach of this region. And we're going to go into 168.53. I log these at the same time is the reason that I'm taking this amount of time there. And then we should get into this 186.76 area, right? 168.78, and we know the regions from there, right? They should be very familiar to us. 169.07, 169.08, something like that, and then 169.47. That ought to give us upside momentum. Now for the downside, we are still without a gap fill, so we are looking below 167.73, or where else could we go? I'd say maybe the loss of 167.91. I think that looks pretty good. 167.91, and that should allow us to fill this gap that we created in the morning, which takes us into the prior morning, which takes us into 167.58. And then if we lose that, 167.25 seems extremely normal. Below that, we'll fall into our regular levels from before that seem familiar to us, 167.07, right? 167.07, very, very important as that low there, with the potential of really getting into 166.70. You know, I think that is 166.70. A lot of levels popping up there for us as we move forward. All right, now what are we looking at underneath? We can see that we are in the neutral zone here from the very tight time frames. That's not ideal for us to consider, so let's go back to the 1 hour, make an assessment. We can see drift continuing. Quite a bit of technical divergence. If we compare where this price action is to where this price action is, that is technically divergent. But we are still trending upward, though that does feel a little softer than it has felt back here, right? See how high this is and how high this is. We are much higher but this is lower. So there is some technical divergence underneath that seems to be something of consideration. I do want you to notice that we are flattening a little, but still holding the distances between the 200 and the 50 expanding, and that the pivot continues to be above the weekly pivot time after time. Let's go to the IWM, holding between the pivot and R1 most of the day. Look at this. That's very nice. It's hit the target. The midline between these two things. Now it could go to here, which is around the R4 region, but that's really pretty. What's the long? I think the long is above 103.71. We could also take that long at the bounce off of the pivot, maybe a little higher than that, 103.45. Right? And that ought to take us into 104.14, and then 104.67, 105.46. I think that's probably as high as we want to look at that. But maybe we take 105.76 and slap it out there as a target. Not really sure that that's going to do it, but we'll see. We will definitely see. Let's take a look at the downside action. We've got a lot of support here in the gap. So the loss of the pivot, 103.27. I think that ought to do it, the loss of the pivot. Or at the rejection of 103.40. Right? And that ought to give us a move into the base of the gap, which is 103.01. We keep seeing that number floating around, and that is important. Whoops. Right down here, we've got some wick action. That would take us to 102.90 from there. And then we've got 102.65. Right around there, where this 50 is. Still good, solid expansion, but the same sort of formation underneath. And this has finally completed its ideal task event here in the IWM. I'm very interested to see what happens today. I really am expecting a little bit of a pullback, but you know, you just never know. You never ever really know. All right. Now to the upside, I want to make sure that oops. I want to make sure that I'm getting that correctly. Yeah, okay. Let's take a look at the cues. And again, this will all be in the blog. Same sort of formation, same sort of tie-dye. Look at how these SMIs are so familiar here. They all look so similar, except not as much stark difference in terms of divergence. I mean, it is still divergent because this is moving up and that is flat, but not as sharp. And notice, this thing has not hit its target yet. Its target is still way up there. So, what's the trade here? Do we get above the wick here? This one probably needs to be above the wick, above 75.75, or say at the bounce off the pivot, which we'll use 75.46. Yeah. And that'll take us into the midline. We're going to suspect that 75.61 might give it a little trouble, but after that, we'll look at 75.83 and then 76.07. Yeah. All right, now let's look at the downside, the loss of the pivot, the gap action there, not significant. 75.38 is the loss, or I don't know, I think it'd be really tricky to take it anywhere around this 75.45-ish level. I'd wait for it to lose that 75.38 rather than try to take it off the bounce. Unless it accelerates really steeply and then starts fading, I would wait until it loses the 75.38 so we can short it into 75.24. Oh, that's so tight. Gosh, you know what? I would be very careful with this one. Very, very careful. Because everything is so tight, you might be better off just absolutely waiting until the breakdown below 75.01. You know what I mean? It's just so very, very messy in there. Because it could stop at 75.24, it could stop at 75.12. So it might just be better just to wait for it to lose 75.01 and then go from there. All right, 74.89. And let's do the 74.84. And then we'll see what goes on. There's a big gap down here at 74.20, 74.25. And so that'll be the thing that we want to watch, right? Overall, flattening action in the price. Moving averages not showing up on the big ones yet, but certainly these smaller ones are showing flattening. See how the distance between them is getting smaller and smaller. All right? We know things are slowing down up there. We want to be very, very careful with that. All right? Okay, that's it. Good luck trading today.